And so if we turn to the riots in particular now, I think one of the things that was very striking about that was, because Starmer was only 1 month into his premiership when they started to happen, but very quickly, partly because he's not a very skillful politician, I think it's fair to say, but the blame for the entire thing ended up sort of falling on his head, and he almost became a representative for 30 years of betrayal and the sense of having lost one's country. So, well, what did you make of his response to the riots? But in particular, it's going to be difficult for him, isn't it, in the fact that he's kind of just continuity Blairism, because all of the problems that have been created by our political system over the past 30 years, they're going to seem to lay at his door, aren't they?
That's exactly right. I mean, let's look at the two. What he tried to do, of course, with the riots was to claim that they were the product of this mythical far right. Remember, far right means absolutely nothing at all. It means just what you and I would call on the right spectrum of politics. So what he did, and I think it was a profoundly dangerous thing, he immediately politicized the riots. And it's very striking if you look back and compare the public reaction to the policing of the riots in 2011 and in 2024. In 2011, there was overwhelming support for police action. There was even significant, a majority supporting David Cameron, who'd only been Prime Minister a year again. It took place at the very beginning of his premiership. So there was remarkable unified response. What is very clear, if you look at public opinion, even in the very early days of the riots, before Starmer's full rigidity and all the rest of it had been revealed, was there were sharply different opinions. In other words, favourable, unfavourable polls swung in very different directions. So I think Starmer already showed then, first of all, his desire to politicize in a very crude and crass way. Again, the whole way in which he's trying to justify what were clearly Labour's taxation policies all along by blaming, 14 years of Tory misrule. Well, it's on the one hand, it's an obvious political tactic, but he is doing it with such crude repetitiveness and in such a tub-thumping way, and having, of course, mounted an election campaign, the so-called Ming-Va strategy, in which he threw away what could have been, if he or these alleged political geniuses like McFadden had more political nous, they would have realised they were going to win pretty well inevitably after the Conservative failure, a huge majority. They could actually have obtained a serious mandate if they had said, as they obviously intended to, we intend to do things. I think they would still have been elected, and they would have had a moral force behind them. As it is now, they're in the extraordinary position. They have 2/3 of the seats in the House of Commons, with 1/3 of those actually voting, supporting them, and 1/5 of the actual electorate voting for them, which leaves them in an extraordinarily fragile position. And you put your finger on something else. The Starmer himself is the quintessence of everything that I was talking about of the new Labour years. He is the lawyer. He is the man who believes that everything is controllable by legislation. He is the one who hates populism, who adored the European Union. In other words, if you think of Britain, if you think of why we're in the mess that we are now, that Blairite state that we talked about is the equivalent of Gulliver, if you remember Gulliver's Travels. It's the equivalent of Gulliver in Lilliput, the land of little people. And Gulliver is controlled by the Lilliputians by being tied down by lots and lots of ropes. Well, we're in exactly the same position. The reason that our politics don't work and our economy doesn't work is this vast mass of over-regulation and contradictory authorities that was created by the new Labour years. But of course, Starmer represents this. So when he says we want growth, it's just the equivalent of a magical incantation. In order to get growth, you would have to demolish most of this structure that we've been talking about. And of course, Starmer is temperamentally and intellectually, if he does indeed have a brain, completely incapable of doing that. But Laurie, we've been letting our own side off very badly. The real problem is that from 2010, or rather from 2005, when David Cameron was chosen as Conservative leader, you've had a Conservative Party which took Margaret Thatcher's notion in 1992 that it was that Blair was their heirs, literally, and they proclaimed themselves the heirs of Blair. there is a trio of figures who lie at the heart of the failure of conservatism. I mean, they were in power 14 years. They did nothing to repeal a single clause, let alone one of the acts that I was talking about now. And the key figures who are responsible for this terrible mess are Cameron, George Osborne, and above all, Michael Gove. It was Gove who was going round, handing round marked up copies of Blair's memoirs, as I understand it, to the cabinet and acclaiming him as the new Machiavelli. This is the catastrophe that we have had. This is why the Conservative Party has failed. But also, of course, it points out why this Labour government will fail. I mean, if I were advising the whoever is chosen as Conservative Party leader, the first thing they have got to do is to say, we will commit themselves, A, to reverse all the main planks of Blairism, but secondly, to show how the incoming catastrophe of this Labour government, because it's already manifestly catastrophic, to show how each point at which it fails goes back directly to all that legislation that we were talking about at the beginning of our conversation.